Hello. I will address the brass, quite frankly, in this because my life would have been completely different, and one of the other reasons why I did not accept my commission into the CIC was because if I existed, I felt like that if I was an officer in that climate of the early thousands, that it would impede other people's careers and that I could survive on my own. Now, let's make this a little bit more effective. Normally, I wouldn't wear a wedge sitting down, but who cares? It's mine. I'm wearing it. You know, these cultural movements that arose out of the '90s and then came into effectivity during after the post after the millennium, and then this response to a religious war, which was the sandbox wars, right? It wasn't necessarily completely about resources. There was a lot of people that felt righteous indignation and that it was a godly and just war. But I was a young man at the time. I didn't have all of the information at hand to defend myself. You know, I was a shit disturber for a reason because I was trying to make people think, but I didn't exactly know everything that I was doing. And again, just the stuff that happened during my career, my cadet career, is enough, more than enough to be pissed off. More than enough. I was a conservative Christian in my teens, and I was like to the point where I didn't want to have sex until after marriage. But then I met a particular woman, and she changed my mind. And again, for a lot of the things that I've done is for the love of women. But women hate that. Women hated within these, because of these cultural movements. They hated men speaking for them. They hated having a male figurehead. And the women plus the gay people banded together and decided that I was the target of desire. And they assassinated my career. And that is truly disgusting. That is not representative or emblematic of the Canadian Forces. But the number of sexual assault cases and abuses that were happening, I need not mention the colonel and the other things that happen, because veterans are probably the most messed up people, especially after combat and being in theater. But it's very surprising, how much the hammer comes down when you need, because you have a better idea of what's good for you. When you're young, everybody thinks that they have a good, they know better as to what's good for you. And when you mess up their plans in the military, they come down on you like a ton of bricks. But they never asked you if you wanted to do it. I had many different options in my life, and there's no better justice or revenge than success. So that's what I did. I pushed through every single one of my failures. I suffered isolation and ostracization and bullying. And some of my own actions, were not very good either, because I was just so angry at everyone for putting me in this position. Even my own family, everyone wanted to continue to treat me like a child. But I'm one of the most intelligent people that I know. I don't know of anybody else within the people that I talk to that could do what I did within those 6 days at Borden. And people at large hate acknowledging their incompetence. But I have done nothing as a good person, a good, decent person, and as a Christian, to answer for my faults. Because again, within aviation, if you hide something, somebody dies. If not now, then somewhere down the road. And again, these people dealing, with the manipulative tactics, the coercion, and the, frankly, sometimes embezzlement, because obviously that goes hand in hand, right? Once people get their hands on money, then they feel like they have real power. But I tell you what real power is. Real power is influence. And I shall not use my influence to destroy people. But you have to. In some cases, you have to. The discipline has to be enforced. And we rise to the position of our incompetence, and then we rest on our laurels. So, I've been trying to get people's attention within the forces, and I love the inside jokes. I love the references. I love the little head nods that happen through social media. I love that. It makes me feel included. I know it, and it's not always for me. They're not always. It's not. Sometimes a pipe is just a pipe. But when we're looking for the worst in each other, that's all we find. We don't see people as people. We see them as criminals. We see them as rebels and misfits. We don't see all the things that happen to them in their lives for them to act like that. I was not ever a heavy-handed person. All I ever wanted to do was give love to people. But it doesn't feel like I'm getting the same love back. Get out what you put in, that old thing. I don't blame any person in particular, because it's a culmination of collective actions. The chain of events that leads to an accident, or an incident, or an injury, or a death. And I knew wholly well what my responsibilities were. And that's why I was so resistant. And I was so rebellious. Because the incompetence of people above me and their attitudes towards me. Because I knew better, right? And the people around me you know, that up until this point in my life, that either got on their knees for someone and then regretted it later and killed themselves. There's more than one. There's more than one. Or were suicidal because, you know, the age-old thing, oh, the veteran comes home, and then no one appreciates the fact that, you know, they had to face down the barrel of a gun. There's more than one way to ruin someone. There's more than one way to kill someone. And I got crucified. I was crucified. So let's not make the same mistakes. And I sit here, you know, after I reached my breaking point, after 20 years of civilian life, because I took it seriously. I took cadets seriously. It came up in wartime. It's very different than in peacetime. I had a set of dog tags. They were surplus. I bought them from Forest City Surplus, and I engraved it. I engraved them myself. Because I understood what was at stake in the pressures that we put on young people. All right, so I wanted to read something from the DEP here, because this came into effectiveness in 1994 and authorized in 1997, before I was even in cadets. And with cadets, again, if you're on a military base, you're 18 years old, and you're a cadet, you're the same equivalency as a private. It doesn't matter what the rank is. You are a member at that moment on that base, employed by the government to train younger people. You are a military member. There is no argumentation against that. Every single bona fide, every single thing. But you know, when egos prevail, systems fail. And the egos of other people failed me. So I don't want to see the same things happen to other people. And some of you could have predicted this. You know, oh, hey, look, he's gonna join or something like that at the end of all this. Or it's the MK Ultra, or it's it's the programming, or whatever else. All these conspiracy theories as to, you know, the indoctrination, you know, the negative aspects, the negative views. But you know, that's what happens when we don't use our intelligence. Military intelligence is an oxymoron. Kurt Vonnegut. So let's read the intro here. A fundamental concern of the Canadian Forces and the Department of National Defence is the strength and vitality of its ethical culture. The Canadian public expects the highest moral standards from defence personnel and has the right to do so. The ethical culture of defense is complex and can sometimes appear to be paradoxical. On the one hand, it is an integral part of Canadian society and must reflect its fundamental values. On the other hand, the nature of defense can involve, in justifiable cases, the controlled use of destructive power in ways that would otherwise be considered morally wrong in our democratic society. Exactly. In response to important factors that highlighted the need for re-emphasis, ethical decision-making, and integrity in government as a whole, senior defense leaders endorsed the development of an ethical program for defense in February 1994 and formally authorized the Defense Ethics Program in December 1997. The program provides an articulated and visible ethical focus for the Canadian Forces and its members and the Department of National Defense and its employees. Employees. Right in print, black and white. Employee. I was an employee of the Canadian government. Every staff cadet is an employee of the Canadian government under the D&D when they're on a military base. This paper provides a general introduction to the fundamentals of Defense Ethics Program. Accordingly, it presents the manner in which the Defense Ethics Program has dealt with philosophical, social, psychological, and administrative issues related to defense ethics. In particular, it presents three hypotheses that have been the basis for the program, for the development. Have been the basis for the development of the program. It analyzes three different approaches to developing ethical programs, and it considers the contribution and limits of the paradigm of a profession to the foundation of defense ethics. The paper takes a detailed look at the statement of defense ethics and its application. It discusses the complexity of moral development in the individual, and in particular, the approach that has guided the development of the Defense Ethics Program in this area. Finally, in addressing the issue of institutional responsibility, it explains in detail in what way the Defense Ethics Program provides an ethical framework for defense. So if we can't defend ourselves from opponents and rivals and enemies within these organizations, then all of this means nothing. And since there's no statute of limitations, here I am. How many times do I gotta say this? How many times is it gonna take before I get what's mine? You can't placate people forever. Okay, so let's jump to rationale for Canadian defense ethics, general considerations, down to section 5. Characteristically, Canadians declare a preference for the type of constraints that a free and democratic society imposes on its citizens to determine how they will live and work together. We observe regularly how they live out that choice, both dynamically and within the tolerable limits of stability. That choice is revealed in the way that accepts a way of life that practices a shared respect for a set of fundamental democratic values. As a liberal democracy, Canada exhibits a way of life that includes ethical principles and obligations necessary for its health. For example, the Canadian Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms has formalized basic democratic principles and obligations that were practiced in Canadian society, a long time before they were enacted into law by the Charter. However, these principles and obligations were considered so important they were warranted being safeguarded by law. Although the application of the Charter has been controversial in the scope of the Charter itself is legally limited to the dealings of individuals with any level of government, the background principles and obligations themselves have a wider application in Canadian society. These ethical principles and obligations influence our belief of how we should be treated and how we should treat others. They also serve a criteria for Canadians to assess how responsibly government carries out its obligations. How responsibly? Okay, that's an interesting wording. How responsible government carries out its obligations towards Canada and its citizens. Thus, when we speak of an overlapping consensus, we are referred to basic principles and obligations, such as the background principles and obligations formalized by the Charter that constitute the public domain of a democracy. So in other words, members of the Canadian Forces are also covered by the Charter. So there's a thing going on there. Is it when we declare war, then everything's under the JAG. When you're under deployment, you're in a different you're in different jurisdiction. You're in theater, so then you're covered under the JAG Code of Ethics. But with the DEP, when you're at home, you're covered under the Charter. And any abuse of power is then therein, an unlawful order. I will not be ignored. It's there in black and white. When we don't have rules, we don't have regulations. Too much liberalism leads to slavery. Okay, let's go to. I'm going down to scope of the Defense Ethics Program, because this philosophy, so even in 2002, even if this is an old document, and I don't have access to the most recent one, this overrules any judgment made by an officer when you're being persecuted for what you did or didn't do. And when people power trip, it's an abuse of the DEP, right? So let's look. Well, that's interesting. Support resources for cadets, junior rangers, and adult staff. Medical care for cadets and junior rangers. Well, this is a good improvement. We didn't have this in my time. Eyeglasses, lenses, contact repair and frames, dental services, entitlements, benefits, and compensation. There you go. Cadets, JCRs are not eligible for compensation and benefits set out in it changed. That's not completely true. But you can submit claims, as it is right now in 2024, by this document. So it's laid out in black and white. To clinics, prescription medications at the CTC ETS, and over-the-counter inpatient medicines. So again, entitlements, benefits, compensation. The cadet JCR will receive health care to treat their attributed condition until the responsibility for providing health care has been, in the opinion of the senior medical authority, successfully transferred to the provincial or territorial authorities. The the CAF, D&D, and or league insurance will pay for necessary health care that is not covered by provincial or territorial health authorities, which is required to treat the attributed condition and is authorized by the senior medical authority. Well, yes, it's in black and white, and we more or less had the same thing. If it happens while you're a cadet, you get taken care of. support resources. Okay, so Kids Help Phone, Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention, Mental Health in the CAF, Sexual Misconduct Support and Resource Center, Canadian Center for Child Protection, Hope for Wellness, Member Assistance Program, and the Trans Lifeline. Okay, foundations of the defense ethics and paradigm of a profession. Defense personnel incur significant obligations to the nation as the primary beneficiary of defense services, to the government as the lawful agents of the public, and to human beings in other countries who are affected by their actions. The responsibility for the defense of the nation is fulfilled through a commitment by the Canadian Forces and its members, and that of the DND and its employees, to serve the nation's security interests. That commitment, however, will only be as strong as the ethical integrity of the organization and the people that constitute defense. It is obvious that all of this depends on maintaining the ethical integrity of the chain of command. To preserve their ethical integrity, the Canadian Forces and its members and the DND and its employees need a set of basic ethical principles and obligations that can guide every decision and action. So in other words, we got a job to do. And when we ignore, you see the measure of a society, or the membership, the measure of any organization, is how we treat the injured and how we treat the disabled. That is the point of society itself, is to ensure that every single person, within reason, has the right to be looked after and not to be ignored. This is section 22. The Canadian Forces and the Department of, the DND are first and foremost institutions of a liberal democracy. This basic fact dictates that both of these institutions must reflect and practice the democratic values that have given birth to the nation itself, while being allowed justifiable exemptions for the controlled use of military force. Thus, for those who serve within a public institution like defense, it is not the larger context that must be reinterpreted in terms of the paradigm or of a profession placed at its center, but rather it is the paradigm of a profession itself and must be reinterpreted in the light of a broader and more fundamental context. For example, within that broader context, Canada's modern democratic society is characterized by a multiplicity of comprehensive belief systems. The ethical values and principles for defense should be derived from an overlapping consensus on values exhibited in a democratic and free society. Although the statement of defense ethics contains values, principles, and obligations that are consistent with the professional obligations of the military and the public service, these values and their application also reflect the organizational responsibilities of defense as an institution of democracy. Thus, while the paradigm of a profession provides valuable insight into the nature of the ethical behavior of personnel in defense, it is only the broader context of defense in an institution of a democratic and free society that can ultimately justify defense ethics. Reference to this broader context will inevitably affect which ethical values should have primacy in defense and the relative weights assigned to these values in decision making. So in other words, the Canadian Forces does not bend over backwards for politics. and for politicians. The Canadian Forces does not serve politicians. It serves the entire country. Okay. So this also covers crimes against humanity. And if we observe foreign actors committing crimes against humanity, they get the fucking book. They get the book. So what are the 6 ethical obligations? So the 6 core ethical obligations are integrity, loyalty, courage, honesty, fairness, and responsibility. There is no hierarchy established among these 6 ethical obligations. So next one, values and ethos. You know, may we not make the same mistakes of the past. Okay, military values are there. Truth, duty, valor. Ethical principles. Respect the dignity of all persons. Serve Canada before self. Obey and support lawful authority. Thank goodness that's just a movie. That's screaming. Okay, this is off of forces.ca/en/values and ethos. And this is where, again, so many abuses happen. Because, you know, people think that they can get away with their abuses of these values and the JAG through the system, manipulate the system, so to speak, for their benefit and the sustainment of their careers. But like I said, I stayed out of it. I didn't want to be a part of this bullshit. This establishment of gay elitism and differential treatment. You know, some rules for some people, certain treatment for some people, and other treatment for other people, which includes, you know, the GBA and GBA plus. You know, they cut the legs out from underneath of some people to raise other people up, and that goes against the very ethics, the pathos and the logos, as I've described. It's not exactly a crime against humanity, but it is a crime against Canada. And that's my position on this. So again, build a bridge. Get over it and move on, okay? We got some shit to do. Bigger fish to fry. And I'm not going to make the same mistakes twice either. So can we do that? Please? Thanks for watching. I look forward to working together.